Campfire Story.
Have you ever met someone who changed your life so completely? Someone who's your first, your last, and your only? I met her yesterday. I met Sheela. I work as an engineer in China. My company hired me straight out of college and offered me a huge sign-on bonus if I would relocate to their main hub in central China. Apparently, the company had been responsible for many dams across China, and due to poor upkeep, had seen many lawsuits leveled against them when the machinery failed. My job was to check the machinery and dams and make sure they are working correctly. It's a very lucrative job, and after a few years, I found myself nearly fluent in the regional dialect. An American is something of a novelty for the people in the rural towns I visit. I often found myself being invited to bars or back to someone's house at the end of the day. The women have also been amiable, but I was intent on saving myself for marriage, so we never did much more than kiss. Even so, I never had any trouble finding female companionship if I wanted it. Well, I didn't, at least. Then I met Sheela. I was checking on a rather large dam near the coast, one that filters the often polluted river water and keeps debris from reaching the ocean. The dam had been leaking something caustic into the sea for a few months, and it was my job to figure out why it was doing that. I won't bore you with the technical details, but it wasn't hard to figure out what was going on. No one had bothered to dump the holding tanks that collected the pollutants, and they were leaking out into the dam wall and then into the ocean. No one had bothered to tell the workers to dump the tanks either. So a week of work and one pumper barge later, the dam was back up and keeping the ocean clean. This was apparently cause for celebration. The dam workers took me out that night for drinks. The local community, heavily centered around the fishing industry, wanted to meet me and thank me for my work. A kind of festival was held, and I was introduced to everyone from the village mayor to the town priest. The mood was definitely festive, and I can remember being handed a small cup of strong liquor early in. The clear liquor was quite potent, and after a while, the night became a jumble of colors and sounds. I danced and laughed and ate some of the best food I've ever tasted. The whole village was so friendly that after a while, I forgot to be self-conscious about my height or my nationality and just let myself be immersed in the moment. I was sitting under an overhang, a fourth cup of the strong liquor at hand, when I saw a goddess approach me. Her hair was pale, not blonde but white, and her dress was seafoam green and clung to her. She had the eye of every man. She had the ire of every woman. And I remember thinking that she didn't seem to fit the standard for these parts. She was tall, almost as tall as me, and her skin was darker, tanned and brown. She looked foreign, vaguely Middle Eastern, and remembered thinking that she looked like no one I had ever seen before. She sauntered up to me, her eyes promising things her body was more than capable of keeping, and extended a hand to me. "Dance?" she asked, her voice gliding out like a midnight tide. I reached out, shakily, and took her hand. She pulled me up, not easy to do, considering I'm mostly muscle and 6'2". As the music started, she began to spin me and pull me in time with her own internal beat. We moved as galaxies moved, a solar system unto ourselves. And when I looked at her, I could see her barely contained longing. She desired me, wanted me, and when she pulled me close, I could feel her heart racing in her chest. Her breasts pressed against me through her dress, and as her lips slid up my neck, I heard her whisper something in my ear that sent pins down my spine. "Come with me, come with Sheela." She broke from me then, a teasing finger tempting me away from the dancers. I stumbled after her, the drink and the fire and my nethers piloting me easily. "Did you say Sheela? Is that your name?" I slurred, letting her lead me towards the beach. She smiled and kept crooking her finger as we got farther from the festivities. She led me through the sprawl of little dwellings that butted up to the sea, and in my drunken state, I was in no mood to think about what I might be doing. Her pale hair danced in the moonlight, and her tan skin was shown so pale it was almost white. It turned her into a ghost, floating along before me as I stumbled on the rutted path. She beckoned onward, and as I came, I could hear some exotic melody floating around us in the air. Then the dog began to bark, and the melody was snatched away. He wasn't much of a guard dog, some little mutt that had been chained up in someone's yard. But the effect he had on her was jarring. She recoiled as though she had been burned, and took a few shaky steps away from the animal. The dog, however, was lunging at her, straining against the chain and barking and growling like a wild thing. He was choking himself trying to get free, and his aggressive behavior was aimed solely at my beautiful companion. Watching him maul, the air was starting to bring me out of my daze. Sheela rounded on him suddenly, hissing like a scolded cat, and the dog yarked and backpedaled to hunker under the porch. Then she crooked her finger at me, and the lovely music began to take me away again. We came to the beach, and she led me to a spot off the main beach that lay behind a stand of vegetation. There sat a hand-carved wooden boat bobbing in the surf. As I climbed inside, I felt the weight of the drink descend on me. I closed my eyes and felt the boat slip out into the waves. My fingers splashed into the spray when we took a wave, and I remember thinking that we were moving much too fast for a boat she must be paddling. I had seen no motor, and the boat looked like the kind of thing that would take big oars and strong arms. As we bobbed and floated in the churning soup, I let my mind focus on the strange music enveloping me and drifted off for what couldn't have been longer than a minute or two. When I awoke, we were on very different sands, and her hand was pressed against my chest, her face very close to mine. She smiled when she saw that I was awake. "Come," she whispered, and was off me and out of the boat with cat-like grace. I rose from the boat much less gracefully, and as I looked out across the water, I could see the lights of the little fishing village many miles away. I looked for the oars, but didn't see them. I must have been out for hours, because there was no way we could have gone that far in minutes. The little boat bobbed in the shallows, having no anchor and no means to stay put either. And that confused me as well. Surely the tide must have taken it back out again, without something to tie it down. Then the warm laughter of my guide and the soft music enveloped me again, and I followed her into the woods. A lush jungle lay not far from the boat, and she was standing at the edge and looking lovely in her green dress. She moved into the tree line, begging to be chased, and in the light of the moon, I dogged her steps as my drink-soaked brain processed only the need to have her. The jungle vegetation was lush and thick. On any other night, I would have been hesitant to plunge into it for fear of snakes or poisonous insects. That night, though, I blundered in with wild abandon, and the deeper I went, the deeper I was pushed to go. When I crashed into a small clearing, a burbling pool splishing placidly, I looked around wildly. She was nowhere to be seen, but I could still hear the music, and I knew she couldn't be far. Suddenly, the burbling became a loud expulsion of water, and she rose from the water nymph. I must have looked ghastly myself, one shoe missing, clothes torn from my wild run, and my face awash with mud and sweat. She approached me, however, as though I were some Greek god. She slid her soft hand over my cheek and pressed her cool lips against mine. She tasted exotic, like oil and spice and something unknown. She tasted like the grave, but I wouldn't know that until later. She broke our kiss and slid her mouth to my ear as she whispered her last request. "Dance for me." I felt my limbs go taut, like a puppet whose strings had been pulled, and suddenly I broke into a wild and frantic sort of dancing. The music in my head changed, becoming primal and dissident. My body threw itself wildly about. My throat erupted in earthy screams of ecstasy, and I felt like one of those ravers in a mosh pit as my body danced out its primal need for her. She sat back against a rock, her dress hiking up to show me a pale leg that I was sure had been tanned earlier. Hadn't she looked exotic before? Vaguely Middle Eastern. Now her skin was pale as cream, and her white hair seemed brittle and corpsey as the moon spilled across it. Her dress suddenly seemed more like a funeral shift, and the green became mold as her cat-like eyes stared at me in the throes of my passionate dancing. I was a beast, a man on fire, and as I danced, I felt my limbs exerting themselves to the limits. My legs gave way first, spilling me headfirst to the dirt. I rolled over, my arms still trying to dance, and I saw her creep forward like something from a horror movie. She scuttled, ghoulish, on all fours, and my limbs refused to heed any of the commands I was giving them. My legs twitched, trying to dance, but unable, and my arms kept thrashing and hitching feebly as she approached me. I could see her staring at me from the soles of my feet, and she peeked at me from between my toes. Then she opened her mouth very wide and popped the big toe of my left foot into her mouth. When she'd opened her mouth, I had seen a double row of sharp teeth that promised to strip my flesh even as they bit through my bones. As the toe entered her mouth, I knew I would never see it again. And when she instead sucked on it, I thought maybe I had been mistaken. Perhaps she was just playing with me. Maybe the alcohol had made me hallucinate, and this was nothing but an alcohol-soaked dream. Then she bit the toe, parting it from my body as she chewed with an ecstatic look on her cannibal's face. I cried out, but my cries mixed well with the primal screams of the dance. No one would hear me out here anyway. We were miles from civilization. Even the fishermen on the boats that might be close by would probably think I was some strange night bird. No one was coming to my rescue, and my body had betrayed me in the wake of the strange song. I was her plaything, her prisoner, and she could do with me as she liked. The other four toes of that foot went down similarly. She crunched them with relish, her serpentine tongue sliding out to lick the blood from her lips. When the toes were gone, she took a bite of the now oddly shaped foot. The blood ran darkly down the nub, and she lapped at it hungrily as she chewed. My throat felt raw from screaming, the pain intense and throbbing. And as she took a second bite, I heard my voice give out from crying. She looked up at me, seductively enough to make certain parts of my body quiver, and began planting biting kisses up my leg. The wounds were red and oozing, her lips now painted in my blood, and as she bit her way up, I began to realize her destination. I tried to break free of her spell, not wanting to be parted from that particular portion of my body. But I was helpless before her. She kissed her way up my leg, her mouth splitting the parameters of her mouth, and ripping at the corners as she prepared to bite through the front of my trousers. Then a dog howled somewhere in the jungle, and she cast her eyes fearfully towards it. She stared in the direction for nearly a minute, seeming unsure of herself. She was rattled. The dog's howl had put her off, just like the one on the mainland had. She stared out into the forest, eyes searching frantically. But when nothing came running out of the jungle to challenge her, she turned back to her helplessly dancing captive. I'll save you the gory details. Needless to say, it was the worst pain of my life. I watched her throat bulge as she swallowed them down, a look of pure bliss on her face, and my warm blood pattered down her plaid face. She looked up then, cat eyes searching, and I thought that she might be seeing my heart as it beat in my chest. She licked the blood from her lips and stalked up my chest, grabbing my arms and holding them down fiercely as so my feebly swinging arms couldn't hinder her. Her mouth tore open at the corners again, and I closed my eyes against the oncoming rip of her sharp teeth. My various wounds ached and bled, and at that moment, I was almost glad that it was about to end. At that moment, I just wanted the pain to stop. That was when I heard the howl, closer now than it had been, and something big slammed into her side. It knocked her off me, sending her squealing and hissing. And when I opened my eyes a crack, I realized it wasn't a dog at all. It was a wolf, a big black wolf with white snarling teeth, and a pair of piss-yellow eyes that looked furious. My mind was a jumble. I didn't ever remember hearing about wolves in China, but I was far from upset by his sudden presence. He leapt onto the woman and tore into her with his snarling maw. She hissed at him, slapping at him with her long nails. But as she showed some signs of driving him off, another wolf barreled from the jungle to join the first. As I lay bleeding, 8 of the largest wolves I had ever seen came snarling from the vegetation to ring her in. She looked at them, and as her eyes met mine, her face was full of fear. They buried her in a ring of ripping teeth and furry bodies. I did not waste time. I dragged myself away from the clearing with what little strength I still had, making for the beach that had seemed so close with my whole feet. As I pulled myself away, I could hear them tearing and ripping at her. Her screams drove into my brain like an ice pick. If you've never heard someone get mauled to death by a pack of wolves, consider yourself very lucky. I could hear them savaging her as I bled and crawled, and I had no illusions of getting far before they fell on me as well. I was leaving a clear blood trail and panting loud enough to be heard from the mainland. As the sounds of their feast became farther away, I began to think I might be allowed to die in the jungle instead of eaten by wolves. I had no hope of finding the beach again. I only knew that I didn't want to die as she had. When my fingers sank into the sand an undetermined amount of time later, I drew them back in surprise. I had never expected to find the beach, and now that the sound of the water engulfed me, I knew I might be allowed to die on the beach in some relative comfort. I dragged my body out onto the beach, my various injuries crying out as the sand caked them and was ground into them. I dragged myself forward until I could feel the shore's wet edge, and then rolled onto my back and lay where the water might slide up to touch me as I lay dying. It was cold fire against my injured foot, but I didn't care. The sound of waves would be a perfect backdrop for my last few minutes on Earth. I could still feel the blood leaking out of my foot and crotch and knew I had lost a lot. I closed my eyes and prepared to die when my eyelids were suddenly blasted by a bright light. I thought it was the sun for one pain-soaked moment. I thought I had fallen into a pain-induced shock and came to the beach by day. But when the light went away, I opened my eyes in confusion. The light returned the moment I did, and I shaded my eyes to see it wasn't the sun, but a searchlight. As it slid away, I saw it was on a little ship that was cruising towards the coast. And when I flopped back down and closed my eyes again, it fell on me and held me in its regard. I heard people yelling, speaking in the native tongue, and there was the splash of boats being lowered into the water. I tried to struggle when they came for me, fearing that they were with her. But my body had reached its limit, and I blacked out as the strong hands lifted me from the sand. I woke up in a hospital bed on the mainland. I had been asleep for 3 days. The doctors told me how some fishermen from the village had heard my screams and come to see if they could help. My left foot was 60% gone. My left leg was in danger of needing amputation since many of the bites had festered. My groin was a tube now. My reproductive organs were bitten off completely, and I was fortunate to be alive. Any longer and you would have likely bled to death. As I lay in the clean white hospital room, being told I would likely lose my leg and had lost the thing that, at my age, made me a man, I didn't feel fortunate. The police came and asked me questions about what had happened, but you could tell they didn't believe me. The island I had been found on was private property, a nature preserve, and no one in the area ever went there for fear of the animals that lived there. They sounded like they thought I was a weirdo, some sex freak that had gone a little too far. And when I told them that wolves had eaten the woman who'd done this, they scoffed. If the fisherman in the village hasn't corroborated my story about having left with a woman, they would have likely assumed I'd done this to myself. I'd still be in the dark if the old man hadn't come to visit me. He told me his name was Lee and that he had been one of the fishermen who had found me on the island. They had left the party after his brother had told them who I'd gone with. He said I had been very lucky to be alive. Many people who ran across the Sheela were not so fortunate. The what? I asked. Sheela, they are old creatures that live on the island. They are spirits, he said, trying to find the words to explain it. Not like our spirits, but still spirits. They come from the union of a spirit of air and a human. They feed on human flesh and love to entice their prey to a secluded area so they can extend their time with them. You said creatures. You mean there are more of them? I asked, horrified. He nodded. We lose men to the island sometimes. Many villages do. Some, like you, come back scarred and broken, saved by the wolves who hate the Sheela. You are very lucky, son. Never forget that. I lay back in bed, cold and wanting to throw up, thinking of others who had been lured to the island and devoured by that hateful creature. That was 2 weeks ago. The doctors say I will get to keep my leg, but there's nothing they can do about my situation below the belt. My company has offered to pay my hospital bills and send over paperwork with a sizable settlement if I don't pursue any legal action for being hurt on the job. I told them I hadn't been injured on the job, but they don't seem to want to take any chances. The settlement will be more than enough to get home and start some semblance of a new life. I can't do what I used to do with one foot, so this part of my life is clearly behind me. So many things are behind me now. I tell my story not to elicit pity, but to warn those who travel to this part of the world. Be careful who you follow home. That pretty face might hide sharp teeth, and you might find yourself following your date back to her lair. There are Sheela out there still, and I can attest to their hunger and their cruelty personally. Don't be her next victim. Subscribe or I will haunt your house. If you like this video, please do comment, like and subscribe for more. Thanks for hearing. See you in the next one.